Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ulan Gaming, back here with another tier list. This time we'll be going over the ranged infantry of the game. Now, once again, this is something that Aussie Drongo did a while ago, but his lists are now outdated, as there have been several balance patches that have come out, and that as there have been several balance patches that have come out, and 4 entire civilizations since he made these videos. So I just felt compelled to try to fix this because it was an absolute mess. So here we are going to be looking at the ranged infantry. Now, a lot of my list will look somewhat similar to Aussie Drongo's for a lot of the same reasons, because a lot of the same units that were good back then are still good now. What I will say is that I have noticed the Skirmisher class of units have gotten better over the last couple of patches, just kind of not by any purposeful buff of the developers. But I have noticed that a lot more players have been spamming Skirmisher units and only Skirmisher units lately, because the amount of units you can select has gone up to like 90 or 99 or something like that. And as such, it makes it very easy to micro large amounts of Skirmishers larger than 50. And as such, it just becomes so efficient to make a huge amount of skirms, and I think that is an unintentional buff to the entire Skirmisher class, so I do believe that makes pretty much every single one of these units better than they were before. But for now, let's get into it, starting with the S-Class. My S-Class is going to look pretty much the same, maybe with some new additions as Aussie Drongo's. The first S-Class here is, of course, the one he started with, the Forest Prowler. Absolutely ridiculous unit. So good base HP. 20 damage, base damage in Age 3 is nuts on a Skirmisher. They get 30% upgrades through... They get 30% worth of upgrades in attack and defense through various cards. They can get counter-infantry rifling. They get 10% HP from the Explorer and all the HP from the TPs. These guys have... They have high attack. They have high HP. They have 20 base range, and it can be upgraded through the lacrosse big button up to 22. I mean, these guys are just absolute monsters. You see some cav coming your way, and it just doesn't matter. You can just fucking snipe them down. It's nuts. The Forest Prowler is everything you want in a unit, all in one go. It is an absolutely beautiful piece of meat. Continuing with the theme of just kind of going over the stuff that Aussie Drongo went, and any changes that I have in comparison to him. We have the Strellet, which I am also putting in S tier just because of its cost effectiveness and how easily it trades with other units. You can just let them die. They have a 20% upgrade card, as well as a 15% in Age 2. And they are just very, very solid across the board. You can just spam these out and have absolutely humongous, overwhelming quantities, and it is just nuts. I guess we'll start filling in the bottom row. We're going to have the Aena here. Aena is just more or less, it's a bad archer. It's a bit worse because it has to compete with the Forest Prowler. It has a rough animation where you have to wait for the entire wind-up of the bow to fire, kind of similar to a lot of the other archer units, especially. As I said, the beginning of this list is going to look very similar to Aussie Drongo's. And we're continuing this trend with the Seton bow here for the exact same reasons as the Aena. There's just no reason that you would ever want to make Seton bows over pretty much anything else. Now, you will have to make them at some point. Of course you will. That is just as the game demands it, but there's just not a situation where you want to be planning on making Seton or Aena in your strategy. It's just not a good option. So that's the start of our S and the start of our D. Now, granted, you can still use these units. They still counter heavy infantry. It's not like they don't. It's just there's no reason where you would ever want to create a strategy based around these two. Whereas you can easily create strategies based around these two, and they're so desirable as units. Now, I guess we'll talk about the skirmisher, the skirmisher variants. So first we have the Dutch skirmisher, which I do agree with Aussie is the best of these skirmishers. Not necessarily for its upgrade potential, but just because, and not mind you, it is very upgradable. I definitely think, though, its upgrade potential is absolutely. It is not as important as the fact that it's available in Age 2, and it just combos so well together with the Reuter, which is, an S-tier Dragoon for sure. In terms of what the skirmisher, the Dutch skirmisher does for the civilization, it is absolutely paramount. As for Germany skirmishers, Aussie Drongo put them in B, but I'm inclined to put them in the A tier, just because in general, once you get to the Third Age with Germany, skirmishers are going to be one of your go-to units, and they're pretty integral. You have the 8 skirmisher followed by the 7 skirmisher shipment combo that's really, really good. And they do have an upgrade card and a Royal Guard upgrade, so they're just very solid, honestly. And I think they got a little underrated by Aussie Drongo in that in that video, so I'm going to put them up a little bit. As for France skirmishers, we're going to put France a little lower. I think I'll put them in B. And this is mostly just because France already have such an amazing array of units at their disposal, and you mostly see France players go cavalry more than anything else. So I do think that the French skirmisher does suffer a little bit just from the fact that France has so many other units to pick from, that the skirmisher doesn't always come to mind as the first unit that you want to use. When you get to Age 3, generally they're going to be going cuirassiers or hussars or musketeers or any other sort of stuff. Now, they absolutely can go skirmishers, and it's a strong option, but it's just not the best. And as for Spain skirmishers would be the exact definition for me for average skirmisher, just completely average. There is nothing special about this skirmisher. You can upgrade it with unction, but there's really not too much. In terms of a perfect baseline centerpiece skirmisher that's serviceable, that works, but isn't necessarily the best skirmisher in the game, Spain skirmisher is exactly what comes to mind. It is the perfect middle ground, and as such, it deserves to be in the middle of the tier list. Now, granted, people seem to think that like B tier or A tier suck. No. B tier is the standard. B tier is the general position of where a normal unit of average quality is supposed to be. That is where it goes. And the Spain skirmisher is still a solid option. It's just not as solid as the other skirmishers are for the other civilizations that use them. Now, I guess we'll talk about Jaegers. I want to focus on the newer ones last, the newer civilizations last. So Jaegers, Aussie put them at the bottom of S after a comment was talking about them with range resistance, but I am gonna have to actually agree with his initial assessment of Jaegers, which is to put them more so at the top of A. And probably even lower now. I'll put them below the Germany skirmisher. And this is mostly just because Sweden has been nerfed a lot now, and Sweden's coin gather is no longer as relevant so that you can mass Jaegers, which you already kind of struggled to mass Jaegers before. Well, it's even harder now, especially at the torque gathers, and generally Sweden players just don't have as much freedom as they do now to do things like mass skirmishers, because they just burn through their coins so fast already. All their coin mines go out and they just struggle. So I don't think the Jaeger is... I still think it's a good, solid option that you can ship them and then you can train them, but it's just not fantastic, as fantastic as any of the other skirmishers that are above them, for the simple reason that they are extremely hard to mass with Sweden. I do mention this because, in case I didn't mention this before, these are specifically Sweden Jaegers, since they are the trainable Jaegers that Sweden gets that they have in substitute of an actual skirmisher type unit. You'll see the same thing with Black Riders when we get to the Dragoons page. I guess for now we'll talk about the China units, the Chukunu and the Arquebuser. I am similar to once again. This list is going to look pretty similar across the board. The Chukunu and the Arquebuser are definitely going to be in the C tier. They are They are usable, solid units that are marred by the fact that you can't mass them quickly because they are attached to banner armies, and banner armies suck. I'm sorry, if you like banner armies, you're wrong. Banner armies suck. You have to get the resources for the entire batch before you train, and you can't train just one unit. You have to train a combination of two. Russia has the same issue with batch training, but it's not as terrible as it's not as monumentally terrible as it is for China, because at least you get all of one unit in a batch of 5 or 10 with the batch training Russia has. With these, it's fucking like 3, and it's awful. And I hate China. I really do. And I definitely think that these skirmishers are absolutely hindered by the fact that you have to take pikemen with them. There is no option to get them just alone except through shipments. That being said, the Chukunu does have quite a few shipments. They have quite a lot of cards, as well as the Agent card specifically for them, and that I do think is worth pointing out, as much as just the Arquebuser has just better stats. So that is the reasoning for those. The British longbow, I will put at the top of B, very similar to Aussie, because they can just pump out a shit ton of damage, and they get 26 range after you upgrade them, which is which makes them having the highest range of any skirmisher unit in the game, having a total of 4 more than the Forest Prowler after all upgrades have come in. English Longbowmen are definitely a fantastic unit. You can't hit and run with them as well, but that does become less of an issue after you get their range card. So you do still have to be careful of cavalry, but the Longbowman does have some very, very high DPS, and it is definitely something that is worth looking into if you are any kind of British player and you've never given them a shot. I'm going to leave the Castor for later because I want to talk about the Castor in relation to the United States sharpshooters. So we'll get to the Castor later. Let's talk about another OP unit, the Yumi Archer S tier. Yeah, everybody knows. Everybody could have seen this coming. The Yumi Archer. Just most of the Japan units in general have incredible upgradability. Yumi Archer have several attack cards. They have a card that can raise their multiplier. They have cards that raise their range, their hit points, their attack, and then they have so many auras that are available to Japan. You can use the Daimyo for 10% attack, the Shogun for 10% hit points. Then on top of that, you can use the Golden Pavilion for 10% range damage, and a further 7% attack from the Japanese isolationism at your consulate. And through this, you can have a total of like 27% attack increase on Yumi Archers, with 10% hit points, and they just shred everything. They're like the Forest Prowler in that it doesn't matter if you throw a cav at them; they'll just shoot them down. Yumi are just absolutely incredible, and once again, only stronger because now you can. It's so much easier to control large masses of them. In fact, I think I might actually put them above the Strelet here. Yumi Archers are just absolutely nuts. They're one of the only troops. They're one of the only skirmisher types in the game, specifically archer types. They're one of the only archer types with a 3 rate of fire and firing at the beginning, making them more similar to actual skirmishers than other archers. Now to talk about the jungle bowmen, definitely agree with putting them in A. I'm going to put them above the Jaeger as well as the German skirmisher, because jungle bowmen are very integral to the Inca playstyle, just like the skirmisher is very integral to the Dutch playstyle. Jungle bowmen, they fight well against their counters just because of the poison. They obviously don't have the absolutely bonkers damage that Yumi archers can get, but they definitely perform very well. Just like the Yumi, they are the only other archer in the game that has a 3 for its attack speed and fires at the beginning, just like a rifled musketeer. That's just like a rifle unit, and it really shows. These units are very solid. They're very cheap to get as well, and there's just not really a whole lot you can say that's negative about the jungle bowmen. They have the Curare buff in Age 2 that buffs their poison, and just, yeah, they're good units, straight up. As for the Obusgun, so Obusgun is kind of weird because some people will say it's S, because some people will say it's S because it can shoot and scoot all day long and it has absolutely nutty attack power, and that's absolutely true, and they're available in the Second Age, just like the Yumi and the Strelitz and the Dutch Skirmisher and the Jungle Bowman, which is part of what makes all of these units so strong. And other people swear that if you just throw cav at them, they are weak as shit, which is also true, and they claim that Obusguns are D tier. I'm inclined to agree with the initial assessment of Aussie that they're probably at the top of A tier. Just because they do siege damage, as we all know, and they just get around that resistance, that range resistance so well. And I think that is just a huge consideration, because they have like 40 base attack too in the Second Age. 40 base siege is just absolutely nuts. They have a negative multiplier against cavalry, but like they're still doing 20 damage a shot to cavalry, and that is more than like pretty much any other skirmisher here can say. These do 20 damage to cavalry in the Second Age. Aussie Drongo, I also believe, mentions their high melee attack range, which is very true. If you try to attack the Obusguns, all his friends are going to be like, "Get off my friend!" They just like all converge onto your hussar. From very, like, they just have a really good attack range, and they're also extremely upgradable. The Ottomans have like 3 cards just in the Second Age that can buff the Obusgun, and they're very solid units. If I have an Ottoman teammate, I want them to be spamming Obusguns. That is what I want them to be doing all game long. It's just spam Obusguns and let me spam another unit. So I definitely think that is a very fair placement for everything here so far. As I said, this all looks extremely similar to Aussie's so far. Next, we'll talk about the crossbowmen. This is specifically the Spanish crossbowmen, because Spain actually use their crossbowmen and other civs just don't, for good reason. Because if we were talking about other civs crossbowmen, well, they'd be fucking here. They're terrible units. There's no reason to ever take them unless you're really in a bind or you play Spain, because Spain can definitely do some fast industrial strategies based around the crossbowmen. And that is something to take into account, but the thing is, it's just not something we see very often, is it? And I can't say I have very much experience fighting Spanish crossbows, and because of the simple fact that I just haven't seen them very much, I'm inclined to put them at the bottom of D with the Aena and the Seton bowmen. Aussie put them in C, but for the simple fact that I've never seen them used, and I know how bad crossbowmen are when I use them, I generally just feel inclined to put them in D tier. So if I'm wrong about that, then I'm wrong about that, oh well. The Gurkha is definitely, for sure, 100% Also, just a picture-perfect representation of an average skirm right next to Spain. These units are, like, identical. What I will say, I actually am going to put the Gurkha above the Spanish skirmisher and above the French skirmisher for the simple fact that it is available in Age 2 and has comparable stats to these, because having skirmishers available in Age 2 is a very big deal, and especially for India, because they also get access to Zambarak's Age 2, so they have solid skirm goon from right from the second age, and they're like one of the only civs that can do this and do it well. And I definitely think that deserves some points there. So I do think that there is not anything particularly special about the Gurkha. It's just a solid skirmisher, but it's not exactly the picture of perfection or anything like that. But I definitely would place them pretty high. Not quite English longbow high, but pretty high in the B tier, just because they are available in Age 2, and that is something that Aussie definitely did not give enough credit when he was talking about them. India has this thing where they can just stay in Age 2 for a really long time, and all of their military units are just fine enough to roll with it. Just because everything they have is just very, very solid. And from here, there's not too many others before we start getting into the new civilizations. Let's go over the Wakina rifle. It's a C tier. It's a C tier for much of the same reasons as before. Once again, my list will look pretty similar to Aussie's for the most part. They're cheap, but that's about it. They're not very upgradable. They don't really have anything going for them. It's just not something that you want to be making as the code. You can make them. They will trade very well with against heavy infantry. That is their job. There's just nothing special about them. You make Wakina rifles and you're like, great, I have some skirms. Whereas, you make some Yumi bowmen and you're like, I have a death machine. And I definitely don't think there's really any other place they can go besides the C tier. Next, we will talk about the Ottoman Slinger. The Ottoman Slinger is the Aztec skirmisher unit equivalent, and I am definitely of the opinion that the Ottoman Slinger is at the top of C. They are very comparable to Strelets in their stats. They are better than Strelets, but they're very comparable to Strelets. But unlike Strelets, they train in batches of 5, and it just never feels like you have enough to do anything worthwhile. They definitely hold off the heavy musketeers, but the musketeers will still fight them, because musketeers have like twice the hit points, and these the Ottomans are nowhere near as cheap on a per unit basis as the Strelet is. And Ottomans just kind of struggle to do anything meaningful. They absolutely are there, and they absolutely are a threat, but it never feels like they're enough of a threat to make a difference. And if I had to pick between Ottomans or pretty much any skirmisher above them, I would pick any skirmisher above them 100% of the time. It doesn't help that they cost food wood, as opposed to food coin, which can be changed through the Aztec mining card, which I always put in my decks. Just because it is nice to be able to have Ottoman. I do use them throughout the entirety of most of my games. But overall, they just feel like, when you're playing them specifically, they feel like a unit that should be doing more than they are. And that is just not they don't feel good to use, put simply. Now from here, we have exactly one unit left of the original cast, and then from there, it's all new units that have been added with the new civs since. And the reason I saved this one for last is because it's very comparable with the USA Sharpshooter. The Castador is available in Age 3, and it has 4.5 movement speed, 45% range resist, and overall it is just a very solid skirmisher that is pretty integral to most Portugal players' playstyles, so I do feel compelled to put them here. I think I will put Jaegers at the bottom of B tier, just because if if a player spots that you are going Jaegers as Sweden, there is nothing stopping them from building a church and making spies. And if your opponent makes spies, then you're fucked, because they have stealth and they will get right up on your Jaegers and just destroy them in seconds. It's just mercenaries do have just the absolute hard counter for that, and I do actually bring the spy card in a lot of my decks for the purpose, especially for when I fight Sweden, because I know that there's always the possibility of me fighting Jaegers or Black Riders or any other skirmisher mercenary type unit, and it's always nice to be able to just shred them in seconds. So I do think we'll go with that. But back to the Castador. I got sidetracked there. Castador has 4.5 movement speed. They're just very solid all-around units. Good. Just A+. Just very, very good. The Sharpshooter is better. Now, if you had asked me where the Sharpshooter went when USA first came out, oh, yeah, for sure. I would have said the Sharpshooter is trash. Because the Sharpshooter had this big issue with its animation, where its animation was like the longbow, where you had to wind up, but they have 3 attack speed, so it makes it even worse. They fired like fucking slugs. But because their firing issue got fixed, especially around the time the state militia got nerfed, it made the Sharpshooter suddenly very appealing as a unit. For one simple fact, they're very comparable to the Castador in stats. They have similar attack stats, they have similar HP, they have almost as much range resist. They have 40 to the Castador's 45. They do have less movement speed, but the real treat about Sharpshooters as opposed to Castadors is that Sharpshooters have the highest heavy infantry multiplier in the entire game. They have 2.5 heavy infantry multiplier at base, and you can upgrade this with the counter infantry rifling, which United States gets for free if you send Springfield Armory, to 3.5, as well as the fact that they can be recruited in the Second Age through the use of long rifles. Now, most people probably have never tried to make an Age 2 Sharpshooter, and as a level 131 United States player, I would say that is something that you should definitely try. If you go, the build order is French immigrants, and then as soon as you hit Age 2, you send long rifles and follow it with Boston Tea Party. Now, Boston Tea Party is like the fur trade card, but it has special quirks about it that are specifically designed for Age 2 play. I'll probably make a video on just that card. It's been a while since I've shown off that strategy. You can make a very large mass of sharpshooters in Age 2, and when you follow with Springfield Armory and get the counter infantry rifling, these sharpshooters here will 3-shot musketeers in the Second Age. It is beautiful. So you get 3 sharpshooters, they 1-shot musketeers. So if you just attack move and then hit and run, enemy musketeers will just go down like flies. It is an absolute treat to see, and it's very easy to do very quickly in the Second Age as well. I definitely think it's one of USA's strongest Age 2 strategies. And it's definitely something that is criminally underrated. I haven't even talked about their range yet. They have less movement speed than the Castador, but they also have far more range. They have 22 range in the Second Age, 23 in the Third, and 24 in the Fourth Age, which is absolutely wonderful. And there's just no reason to ever pick the State Militia over the Sharpshooter, which is why we'll go to the State Militia now. Once again, Sharpshooter used to be D, now it's towards the top of A, I would say. The State Militia had the opposite, where when United States first came out, State Militia was like right here. Just because they were so incredibly fast and so incredibly tanky right from the Second Age. It was just absolutely nuts. But then the Great State Militia nerf came out, and they just suck now. They're still cheap. They're not as cheap. They're more expensive. They have less HP. They're back down to 4.5 movement speed as opposed to the 4.75 they had before. You can stun long rifles, which is pretty much the only way these guys are usable. But when you stun long rifles, you also get access to the sharpshooter in the Second Age. So then there's just even less reason to make State Militia. Like, you can make them in a pinch, but they're just not. They're not great. They also have pretty low damage, 14 base damage in the second age, with a only 1.5 multiplier against heavy infantry, with no special properties like the jungle bowman. These guys just don't pack very much of a punch at all, and honestly, I'd put them right down here with between the China skirmishers and between and the Otontans and Wakinas. I think this is a pretty fair spot for them. I definitely think they're not useless like these ones are, but I think this is a pretty good spot for the state militia, given how they perform now after all the updates they have had. Let's talk about the Owlhoot now. So the Owlhoot is the USA special unit available at the tavern. It is a skirmisher that has a charged action that allows them to do an area of effect shotgun attack with the same range as their normal attack, but no multipliers, and it's a pretty solid strategy. I've definitely used them before in all of my outlaw strategies. Owlhoots are like one of my go-tos. I have absolutely destroyed a shipment of Jaegers that were all clumped up together using the charge action. You just see the entire army's HP bar deplete to 0 at once, and it's absolutely beautiful, but I do think they are situational and a little hard to mask, because you do need a full-on strategy based around them that kind of pigeonholes you into using more and more and more of the outlaws and less and less and less of everything else. So I definitely don't think they are as good as the Jaegers. Well, that's not true, because they are easier to mask than the Swedish Jaegers are. So we'll put them above the Swedish Jaegers here. And I think this is a pretty decent spot for them. They're above average. They're above these two right here, the hallmark of average skirmisher, these three. But they're nothing special, you know. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the Marine. Now, the Marine is not technically a skirmisher, but it shares all the tags and is countered by many of the same things, and I really just wanted an excuse to talk about them. Marines are, in my opinion, one of, if not the overall best USA unit in that USA has access to. They are very tanky. They shadow tech extremely hard because they scale off Age 3 stats that are stronger than most Age 3 other musketeers in the game. These guys don't have a heavy infantry tag, so they are not countered by anything here. They actually beat pretty much they beat everything here in a standard shootout fight. Just because they have so much HP and damage. Of course, they can get hit and run by a lot of these units, which is why they pair very well with Hussar. But overall, I would say that the Marine, and they also have extremely high siege and multipliers against artillery. So whereas all of these units are very weak against artillery, with the exception of the Obus gun, this is more like the Obus gun, where your enemy rolls up with falconets, and you're like, okay, bro, bring it on, and you go through a slug, and you just go through a shootout. And because of all of these properties, I would definitely say the Marine belongs probably right around here. I think the Marine is an absolutely fantastic and criminally underused United States asset. You can, once you get to the 4th age, which you can do relatively quickly using my build order that's available in my Discord, you can get the Minutemen companies, which sends 6 to 10 and allows you to train batches in 16. It's like a 16, just consider Minutemen companies like a 26 Marine shipment, and then the ability to make 16 more like every couple of minutes. It's fantastic. And I just wanted an excuse to talk about Marines more than anything, really. And next we'll talk about the 2 new skirmisher editions that came from the African civs, the Fulani archers and the Neftenia. Now, to be honest, I still don't have very much experience fighting the Hausa in Ethiopia, but in my experience, both of these units have been pretty strong and go-to units for both of the civs. So without too much information on upgrades and stuff like that, I am going to go ahead and just blanket approval these units to be like the bottom of A. I don't know, something like this. I think this is pretty fair. I do think the Ethiopia one is better, just considering looking at their stats and stuff like that. I'm not an expert on the African civs, but I do think that this is, in general, just based on what I've seen and felt fighting them, that's a pretty okay spot, you know. And now we'll talk about the two Mexico editions, the Bandito and the Saltidor. Now, the Bandito is the one that's available at the tavern, just like the Alhut. However, I do think it is notably worse than the Alhut, because its grenade attack is short range, and you generally don't want your skirmishers being in short range. You want them to hit and run and kite all day. So because of that simple fact, I think I will put them as being below the average skirmishers. I definitely don't think they're C tier, but I do think they are going to be just barely below average. I think this is a pretty decent spot for them. Both the Alhut and the Bandito have 20 attack in H2, which is really high for a skirmisher. I think it's the highest of any skirmisher in the game, actually. But they are outlaws, and that does make sense. They do have low multipliers against heavy infantry and such. But I do think that overall this is just a pretty decent place to put them. And lastly is the Saltidor, available to Mexico. Now, I am placing this with the February pop notes in mind, and I will definitely, without a doubt, be placing the Saltidor in S tier right next to the Yumi. The Saltidor is an absolute beast. They have, I think, they have 4.5 movement speed in the second age. They have very high attack. A normal skirmisher has 15 attack in age 2 and 18 in age 3. Well, these guys have 17 in age 2, and that upgrades to 19 or 20 in age 3, and is just an absolute powerhouse across the board. So they have high movement speed, high attack. They of course have range resistance, just like any other skirmisher. They're super upgradable. They have lots of combat cards, and in the second age, they have a card that boosts their range and movement speed. They have a movement speed buff in addition to just like advanced arsenal. They have a movement speed buff in the second age. These guys can just be absolutely just flying through the map, and it is definitely something to see. Especially once the February pop note comes out and the movement speed actually gets implemented. They can also go into stealth on top of all this, and they're very good for scouting, because if you hit an enemy, even when the enemy runs away, you can temporarily see them going through the fog of war. So they just have everything going for them. They are quite literally everything you could possibly want in a skirmisher unit in terms of extra bonuses, with the exception of the Forest Prowler, because this guy is just an absolute monster. But I think that will do it for this list. Thank you very much for joining me. Let me know if you guys have any agreements or disagreements with anything I have put here, especially in regards to the African civs, which I know I kind of glossed over because I'm not really super knowledgeable on those ones in particular. And let me know if anything surprised you. And I hope you have a lovely day, and thank you for watching.